This is what we get stuck in. This is what is a biology of trauma. This is how it plays out with the early life shock, is that neuroception has formed since early life and attachment. It is wired for seeing danger, even when there is no danger. So what is a heart shock? Let's start there as a review and bring in the attachment piece. So the elements of a heart shock. The first one is that it's unexpected. That's why it is a shock. It's unexpected. In the case of an infant, we do come into this world with an assumption that we are going to be taken care of and protected. That's wired into our being, as attachment is wired into our being. When something happens that is so contrary to what we expected to have happen, then that can bring in the element of a shock. It is so unexpected. Did not see it coming. Because of that element of a shock then, and it being so unexpected, it causes an immediate overwhelm. There isn't the usual stress response first, and we're going to intend to take action. We may be able to take action. Then there's this thwarted movement. All of that happens in a single instant in time. It's so compressed that yes, our system still experiences that uprise into sympathetic, this thwarted movement, panic, freeze, and then shut down. But it is so compressed because it all happens together. It causes this immediate response of overwhelm. We call that the trauma response in the body because of what is happening at the cellular level. That's the body's going into a trauma response. Because of this element that it is immediate and it causes such rapid shifting of our states, then the impact can be hard to complete the response. We know that in order for a trauma to not become stored in our body, we need to complete the trauma response when it happens. When we complete responses, they don't become stored in our body. But the impact of a shock makes it very hard to complete the response at that time. And that is why it becomes stored trauma in the body, because we're not able to complete it. Because it becomes stored in our body, in the nervous system specifically, it can severely disrupt a child's ability to trust and to feel safe. Shock in early life is a form of attachment trauma because it's causing a trauma response. So as we go back to the definition of trauma, it's going to be the same definition as an attachment trauma. Anything that for any reason at that time in our life caused an experience of overwhelm of the body. A heart shock in early life is a form of attachment trauma. It caused a trauma response in the body. When we understand that attachment is not just our emotions and it's not just our relationships, attachment is a baby's survival. Any baby cannot survive without someone else to help care for it. It can't get its own food. It can't regulate itself. So attachment is one's survival. The attachment was the degree of internal regulation of the nervous system. And when we look at the effect of a heart shock, by the reason that it creates a trauma response and becomes stored, that becomes dysregulation. And so the heart shock is going to impact the degree of internal regulation that a baby, that an infant, that a child will then develop coming out of their childhood. And this attachment becomes our basis for meaning that my nervous system is wired for perceiving things, not for truly assessing reality. Neuroception forms our intuition, and our intuition is not based on reality. It is based on our neuroception, which is the perception of our nervous system. Attachment sets the whole tone for our nervous system because it's happening during neurodevelopment. It is literally shaping our nervous system. We can have a heart shock in utero. We can be exposed to things that are such a shock to our system that we experience that moment of shock, panic, and shut down. This will also happen if there's any, complications in utero, where the life of the baby is at risk, that can be experienced as a shock to the growing fetus. A birth trauma, a cord wrapped around the neck, that can be a shock because it's unexpected and all of a sudden, I don't have what I need to stay alive. This is not what I expected. This is not supposed to happen. So anything around birth trauma may be experienced as an early life heart shock. What will definitely be experienced as heart shocks is any separation from mom after birth, and whether that is to the NICU because there's complications, whether that's because we've decided to adopt this baby out. Separation is a heart shock to a newborn. It is not what is supposed to happen. And it creates such a survival crisis for the baby because it does not think it can survive being separated from birth mom.
How common this must be too, where a cord gets compressed, if not completely wrapped around the neck, but compressed coming down, or there's a vacuum extraction, or forceps or whatever. And then the mom has been drugged out so she's not available and possibly goes into postpartum depression. It's I would imagine, a pretty common pattern. So it's wow, this is very powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Aimie.
Maternal depression is one that we need to consider because as an infant is coming out and they're engaging with mom, they need to see her. And by seeing her, I mean they need to see the life in her. If when they look in her eyes, she's not really there, that is a survival crisis to the baby because they're depending on her and her life within her to sustain their life. And so that type of interaction where mom's not really there. Physically, she's there, but they're looking into eyes that seem dead, that seem numb, that seem flat, even though she's going through the motions, even though she's feeding the baby, even though the baby is taken care of. That is not what their experience will be internally because of what they need in terms of attunement. They need to feel like they are seen. And if mom does not have the life in her eyes, if she doesn't have the sparkle in her eyes, she's not going to be able to give that. She's not going to be able to give that experience of reflection and the mirroring that happens for the healthy development of the brain and the nervous system to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel understood, to feel cared for, protected. There's this tension that develops at the cellular level between what do we have to do for growth and survival and what can I conserve. At the tissue level, we're going to have either increased tension, which we call bracing. These are attachment bracing patterns that are there to guard us from even feeling the ongoing impact and pain from a heart shock, or other tissues can have a lack of tone. This is part of that energy conservation. Yes, we can have a combination of both so that some muscle groups are bracing and other muscle groups just go lax. There's just no tone. That is because of the energy conservation and because they've already gone into this place of there's nothing that I can do. There's no point in even trying. So the muscles can lose their lack of tone. On a system level, the digestive system takes a hit because of the changes in the nervous system. The immune dysregulation starts to happen. And on a behavioral and emotional level, we can see both a guarding and an I don't care syndrome. And again, the I don't care syndrome is the equivalent of the lack of tone in the muscles.
It speaks to so much of when I was working with children, one of the hallmarks was they always had low tone. And I used to, why do all these kids have low tone? What is this low tone? And there was never an answer for that. That was just a symptom. That was just one of the things that you always looked for. It was so frustrating because I always knew I was missing something. I always knew that there was something that I didn't understand. there was always a system there. It was a family system as well. There was so much going on. And when that child has low tone, they're missing out on so much because there's so much that they can't do, that they can't experience, that their movement is always compromised, which then is a whole domino effect for their whole life. So frustrating trying to get these kids to increase their tone. And you'd do all the therapy things, and you'd put them in the hammocks, and you'd put them on the scooter boards, and it never felt like enough. And I think what I'm really noticing too is the attachment issue is that parent gets blamed, and the parent will take the guilt of that as well. And so therein lies a whole nother dynamic. And something I've heard often in autistic circles as well, that there's a realization that part of an autistic sort of process is learning to realize that their parent wasn't to blame. That's a big dynamic. That relationship needs to be healed. And that was just really helpful to hear that again from that perspective, that the baby can't not blame the parent. Their system can't not blame the parent. That is the dynamic. Heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking dynamic.
It creates an attachment grief because if I experienced a heart shock, someone didn't do their job to protect me. And so even if it didn't happen with the parent still gets blamed in terms of the baby's infant or nervous system, because that is the parent's job in their mind. That is their expectation of how life is supposed to go. So even if the heart shock happened as a result of a medical procedure, for the baby, they're still making the decision unconsciously that their parent cannot be trusted to protect them. And so there's also this degree of absent grief because I didn't get what I needed. I didn't get the protection. I didn't get even the ability to process this.